All right, everybody, thanks for joining us here. Ben and I are about to go do a hijinks hockey event up in Salem, New Hampshire, so we've got a nice hour ride ahead of us. I thought it would be a good time for us to do a little bit of conversations in the car with Ben, and it would be good for you to get to know somebody else other than me, and we can hear somebody else's story of how they got into this industry. So this is my good friend Ben.
Hi everyone.
Ben is going to. Why don't you tell everybody who you are, what you do?
Thanks, Mark. So my name is Ben Rabinovitz, and I am the operations director over at 1510 AM WMEX. It also covers Quincy on 101.1 FM and online at WMEXBoston.com. And that wasn't supposed to sound like a commercial, but boy, it came out like one.
Came out a little bit like that.
It's just the way it is sometimes, but I have had a very interesting experience getting into this industry, certainly. We're going to go into that in a little bit more detail, but it's been a very intriguingly fun experience in life that I don't think would have happened unless certain factors happened first, and we'll dive into that.
So, what would you say? What was the thing you wanted to do when you were a kid? Like, where did you want to be? What was your passion in life?
Well, way back in the day, little wee Benny really wanted to be a paleontologist after watching Jurassic Park 1. And, well, it didn't take too long to realize that one may or may not pan out in the long run. But my father was actually a radio DJ back in the 70s and the 80s on a local station down in the South Shore. And long story short, he was very good at what he did until I came along, in which case radio sales in the 1980s, not exactly the lucrative business that you might have thought it was based on shows like The Suits and all that other good stuff.
Yeah.
So needless to say, you had to get himself a real gig that paid for a family. And I knew that story even as a young child. And I always said to my father, someday I'm going to get the family name back in the business. One way or the other, we're going to make this happen because you gave up your dream so that I could exist. And I never forgot that.
And it's kind of cool that you and your dad are both on WMEX now.
It's full story, man, full circle. So when the opportunity came up and I got the operations director position, we obviously had to start from the ground up, and we had a morning show that needed a producer. We had evening shows that needed to happen. I can't do all of it by myself. So I said, wait a minute, full circle. And now the opportunity came, and I said, hey, Pops, what are you doing Monday through Friday for a little bit? I said, I've got this other job I'm working at the moment, doing this, that, the other thing. I said, well, how would you like to toss that in the can and come work for me at WMEX? And he said, really? The WMEX, like the good guys, from 1932 all the way up to the 1970s and a little bit into the 80s, WMEX was the premier station, top 40 hits in Boston. And when I told him what the opportunity was that I had for him, it was all set in stone from there, and I made good on my promise to give back to him for giving to me the gift of life in the first place. So pretty cool how that worked out like that, because most people, Mark, I'm sure you've seen and heard this across the universe, most people don't work with their parents. Most people barely have a functioning relationship with their parents. I'm very lucky and blessed that my parents were good to me as a kid, and therefore when I became an adult, we were able to transition that relationship from parent-child to adult friendship.
That's awesome.
And then really that is so few and far between. I know so many friends that it just didn't work out like that for them, because let's be honest, how many times are you going to get a 60-something-year-old working with their 35-something-year-old? It just doesn't happen like that.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting that it's taken the course that it has, but that's where we're at now. And I'm happy to say that to this day, we're 5 years into this process, for me at least, on the radio station, on a 13-year career running right now. And that's what's going on. That's pretty cool as far as I can say.
That's awesome. I'm lucky as well. I'm on the other side of that because I've had my son Everett on a lot of shows growing up, and there were a lot of cool things that we did when he was younger too, but it was interesting when he got out of high school and was trying to find his way and figure out what he wanted to do. And we had an opening at Four Wall, so we were like, "Hey, you want to come work in the shop, be a lead for a little while?" And he's doing that now, so I get to work with him every day, which is kind of cool. Get to go to lunch, and we've got the father-son thing at home, but while we're at work, we're compatriots, which is kind of cool.
It's a really unique experience to be able to share that with a family member like that. Whether it's that way, your way, or any other way you can figure it out to be, it just makes life that much more enjoyable knowing that you've done something for someone else that makes such a difference in their life like that. Even if it's just a job, just an opportunity that came out. You know, that's what the AV industry, I've found at least, is all about, is folks that are in have got to give to those that are not. And that's how the circle continues, because honestly, I mean, I'm not sure too many other ways that people even really get into the industry in a comfortable way that's not anxiety inducing and having to jump through 17 hoops. More than half of them, you don't even know where they are, how much fire they're on, or where they might exist.
Yeah, it's interesting, because that's the main reason that we're doing a lot of these vlogs and these interviews, is trying to figure out how people got into the industry, and whether it was kind of a backdoor way or by accident, or if they just went to school for it. There's so many different ways to get into live events and AV and even radio and broadcast. I went to broadcasting school but didn't end up in the broadcasting field, and I used that experience to kind of guide in the things that I wanted to do, which was a lot of this live event stuff and a lot of these dreams that I've had. How did you start to think about getting into this, and where were you like, yeah, I kind of like doing the radio stuff, but also you do a lot of live event, you do a lot of AV, like we're doing right now,
right?
Where we're heading. What made you want to get into that?
So I would have to blame/thank as a child watching the old school WWF growing up, because I thought that was the coolest thing in the world, was the in-ring announcer that got to announce the wrestlers as they come down and the winners, and that whole thing absolutely captivated me as a kid. And then when you mix that with my passion for hockey and watching the Bruins and listening to, being lucky enough to listen to Jim Martin for all those years growing up, I said to myself very early on, that right there, if it's not the radio, I want to be the PA guy for the Boston Bruins someday. And in that moment, subconsciously, I just started working toward it however I could. And thank goodness I grew up in an age where video games were online and you could play hockey with people all across the world. It took a little effort in the early 2000s, I'll be honest. They were not exactly easy to hook up and link up with, but once you got it going, it was really cool. And I would start doing play-by-play during the video games. And obviously some people absolutely loved it, and it was like, oh, dude, keep going. This is great. I don't even care if I'm losing right now, 10-0. Keep going. And then there were other people that were like, will you just shut up already, bro? Like, stop it. But, you know, years and years of doing that, I mean, goodness, probably a solid 15 years of doing that growing up. When the opportunities in life presented themselves on the real stage and the big time, I felt like I was already there. I was already ready to just jump in the chair, the headset goes on, and it just starts happening. And, you know, it's funny, Mark, you said you went to broadcast school with the intention of getting in. It didn't quite pan out like that for you. On the opposite side, I never once envisioned going to broadcast school and ended up in this spot, in this industry.
It's crazy how that works.
And it's funny because the legendary Larry Justice, which is on WMEX every day, he's 80-odd years old. He's been doing it since 1956. And he said the same thing to me when I started working with him at WMEX. He said, Benny, you will find that 98% of the people that go to broadcasting school, and I'm not trying to dig on it, it's just a fact, will not end up in the industry at that level or at that capacity. They'll find their way in another way with that experience. But almost all of the people, especially from the 50s, 60s, 70s and up, that made it to the big time never stepped foot in a broadcasting school.
Yeah, lucky them.
It's just crazy how it worked out that way. I mean, don't get me wrong, I did look into it. I was going to spend the $15,000 to do it because I felt, well, even though I've made it to this spot, I better have something to lean back on. And it was an associate's degree basically in broadcasting is what you would end up with. And I talked to a few of my colleagues that had been there and done that. And one of them specifically said, you know, Benny, it's funny you say that because I'm going to tell you, don't bother. I did the same thing you're doing, talking in his perspective. He said, I started in radio, and then I had the same thought, went in, and I dropped out probably 4 months into the program because I realized there's nothing here that I'm learning that I didn't already know. And just to even follow through and get the piece of paper at the end didn't seem worth it to them in that moment. And again, I'm not going to persuade anybody not to go. There are a lot of great things that you can learn. There's a lot of great people you can meet. And there's wonderful networking that you can get, which again, is probably how most of the people who go end up going, is through the networking aspect at that point.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really neat to see how that kind of opinion of it really kind of swayed, because it's such a specialty thing. You would think, oh man, if I go to broadcasting school, I'm a shoo-in. I'm going to get good and go and mix it with the talent, and there you go.
I agree with that 100%. I think the networking is more important than the piece of paper in some instances, because you can have that piece of paper that says you've got an associate's degree in radio broadcasting, but you've really got no experience. You've got a little bit from being in the class and doing some of the hands-on stuff, but I think you jumping right in, and even my story kind of jumping right in and just getting your feet wet and getting the reps and getting the experience and really understanding from an operational perspective how things work. Plus, it doesn't hurt that you have a golden voice and that you can think like a tack. I mean, you are sharp, you're fast, you've got a quick wit. You can hear it in your play-by-play, you can hear it on the radio, in your banter. I mean, that is a talent. That is not something that you can learn in broadcast school. You can learn gain stages and what knobs do what and things like that. But you've got some God-given talent.
Well, thank you, Mark. I appreciate that. And, you know, to your point, you're right. You can learn a lot in a classroom, but nothing other than actual real-world experience can prepare you for some of the situations that at least I found myself in. And I'll tell you, one of the very first times that I made friendly with one of the musicians and artists through the radio station, it was Sal Baglio and the Stompers, of all people, East Boston's own, made it huge in the 80s, great hits across the board. And it just so happened that I happened to meet Sal through networking. He came to the studio, and through our talking, he said, man, I don't know who you are, but you're just a really cool dude. How would you like to come and introduce the band onto the stage at the Lynn Auditorium or where it was, the Plymouth Memorial Hall, or wherever it was? See, I don't even remember where it was. That's how crazy that is. And I said, wow, I mean, what an honor. And this was their last show as a group. After that, the Stompers were going their separate ways. I mean, the guys are in their 50s, and yeah. I understand. So that moment, when that finally came, you show up at the venue 2 hours early, you go downstairs, you meet the crew again, you meet the whole band, you meet the AV crew, you meet the management for the venue. The butterflies start ticking right there in that moment. And as you went up the staircase, like, again, this is all my experience at least, as I went up the wrought iron spiral staircase from the bottom floor up to the stage level, those butterflies really started ticking. And it wasn't until you got to the side stage area that you really took in how many people are in this stage and are about to be looking at you, because you're going on stage. Now, radio, in that medium, there are no eyes on you. There are no people in front of you. There are millions listening all across New England and the free world, but you don't see them. You don't experience the reaction, the facial expressions, the people talking and whispering to their friends next to them. All of that is so noticeable that when you step on that stage and the spotlight comes on and you realize it is the epitome of go time. There is no substitute for that. Mark, I know you've been on stage as well. You could probably share just as many stories about it, but that very first time for me, stepping up to that microphone and just, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and hearing the vibration and the power of your voice coming through all those watts of power on the speakers and the rig overhead, and you could just feel the vibration bouncing off the people in front of you in the audience.
It's awesome.
And we're talking 1,000 people or better in that particular venue that night.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember my eyes didn't know where to go. I was looking in every which direction except probably the one I was supposed to, which was straight ahead. And, you know, you're trying to think on your feet. You feel the adrenaline in the ball of your heels, and it just goes right up your body. And next thing you know, it's do or die. It really is. And there is nowhere to hide when you are center stage. The band's not even out yet. You're just supposed to give the introduction announcements and get everybody hyped up, because that's all that's really discussed ahead of time. It's, yeah, just go out there, say hello, tell everybody, you know, where you're from, what you're doing, who they're here to see, and introduce the band and get off the stage.
That's it, yeah.
That's it. But that, what felt like an eternity, in retrospect, maybe a full 2 minutes,
Yeah.
maybe. And just when it was done, and I said, ladies and gentlemen, the Stompers, and the boys come out, the place starts going wild, and Sal comes up to me, puts a hand on my shoulder, and he just says, my friend Ben, getting it done. And for me, that was it. I was like, wow, I might be the coolest D-list celebrity going right now, you know?
That's awesome, though.
And it was. And it's happened now probably 6 or 7 times, at least for me, that I've been on various stages, introducing various people and doing all kinds of different talks. There's so many different things that we cover. And of course, doing hijinks hockey. I mean, there's no shortage of antics. Folks, if there's one bit of advice I could give to anyone out there that gets the idea of stage fright, you just have to remember, it's all in the lead up. That is all internal hype. And when the time comes for the hype to be done and the job to get going, a professional will always find a way to lock in and make it happen, because the show must go on.
Yep.
And there are no do-overs in front of a live audience.
Nope, there are not.
So that's probably the first bit I would like to share with everybody.
That's great.
It's such a humbling experience too. The first time you hear all the applause and you actually getting real feedback from people in the real time, it's crazy. It really is.
Ben, you've had a real interesting career over the past really 15 years or so. I know we met doing Skating for the Nation, and
feels like a lifetime ago.
Man, it's like I'm trying to think back when that was. I think it was
That was 2012.
That's so crazy how long ago that was. But we were doing, when I was with PSAV at the time, you were looking for a PA system and stuff. You were going to be the voice and do all that stuff, but you were looking for someone to bring all the other stuff. And I remember coming and bringing it all, and you were like, man, how does someone do this? And I was like, you just got to ask. And
You just got to do it.
More than happy. So can you give people, you know, your path to entry into the AV live events world? And I you know, that does kind of dovetail into your radio business and what you've been doing for the past couple of years. But what was your path to entry like?
Sure. So I was very fortunate to know somebody that knew somebody at the radio station that I started with, which was a station down in Marshfield, Massachusetts. And my name was forwarded as a courtesy from this person to the sports director at the time, the legendary broadcaster Bill Wilhelm. He called me back. He said, hey, got your resume. I was given a recommendation from this person, and I'd love to have you come in for a meeting. So at first, you know, I went in for the meeting with him, and he basically said to me, hey, you know, what we do is a once-a-week show, but during the high school season, we do football, basketball, and we don't really do hockey because, you know, it's cold and I don't really like hockey rinks, basically. So he said, tell you what, why don't you go down to Sandwich, Massachusetts on this day, and you call in the football scores from this particular game. You go live on the air when you do it, and this is the format, and we'll give you a shot. So that worked out, and for that one, I call it a 2-month span, because football season's not exactly a long season in high school world. It worked out. With my job schedule at the time, because let's be honest, folks, you gotta keep those bills paid one way or the other, I wasn't really able to do much more than that. So that opportunity stayed valid, but it kind of went to the wayside for a time. And at the time, I was working full-time in a human services role, taking care of adults with developmental disabilities. I was an in-home counselor. I was trained to dispense medication and respond to behavioral crises and all kinds of wild, wacky things that, again, feel like a lifetime ago, but in reality were only 10-ish years ago. And that came to an abrupt halt one day, and I said, well, geez, now what do I do? You know what? I'm going to call that guy at the radio station back and let him know that I've got some time on my hands. So he said, great, well, I didn't forget about you, so come on down, we'll have you on the show live once a week, every Sunday night. So I started going, and I had that time, the ability to do so, and just get on there. I was their new hockey expert, because again, they didn't have one. So I'd go on and muck it up in the corners, talking Bruins at that point, which, lucky us, they had just coming off of a Stanley Cup season 2 years prior, and there was no shortage of hockey excitement going on. And during that same time, I met my, would end up being future boss at the time. And it was so funny because, you know, I was in a state at the time of, I don't really care. I'm young and I'm trying and I'm doing anything I can to make an impact in this world. And I made this guy laugh. So much so that at the end of that particular night, he looks at me and he goes, now mind you, I had a wild beard. I hadn't shaved in like 4 months. He looks at me and he goes, who are you? And what on earth do you do for a living? And at the time, I was just working a part-time job at a sub shop. So me being a smartass, I'm a dude that's working at a sub shop right now and just trying to make it work. Why? What do you do? He goes, well, I own Bissell Commercial Vacuum Cleaners, and not to drop a name, but I own the giant commercial company. And how would you feel about an interview? And I said, oh, yeah, let me just call that sub shop and tell them to pound sand. Give me a minute, would you? So I go in, I start working for him. Now, during that same time, Skating for the Nation 2 was coming up because I had already met you at that point, Mark. That was 2012 that we had initially met, and we had stayed friendly, we had stayed in contact, and we had done a couple of other small things, and slowly but surely, as you said, you just got to ask, and I did. And you were beyond generous with your time and your knowledge in imparting what you could to me. And one of the first things you said to me was, in this world, you can specialize in whatever you want, but if you want to really make it, you need to be a unicorn. You need to be skilled in multiple things. And if you got the voice part down clearly, if you can figure out the engineering part and the audio part, you will be a rare creature in this industry and create value for yourself in the eyes of these companies, potentially. I took that to heart. So anytime we got together or had the opportunity, I just tried to absorb everything I could from you. And let's be honest, that wasn't the easiest thing in the world because I'm not bad at what I do, but I am far from the fastest mouse in all of Mexico, let me tell you that. So slowly but surely we get there. I purchased my own gear. Actually, you gave me my very first set of speakers, my first pair of Mackies, and a couple of other bits and pieces. And next thing you know, we started doing live baseball of all things.
I remember that.
Down in Plymouth at the, oh my goodness, the Plymouth Pilgrims of the NECBL. They're now defunct. But at the time, they had won 2 championships back-to-back years, and it was a crazy organization. So I got the opportunity to do the PA for those games. And just on a side note, I got so intertwined with not only the engineering part, the striking, the setup, the making it happen, the deadlines, showtime is on, It's got to happen, and you got to do it right the first time.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget, by the end of that experience, I'd say 2-3 years later, it's now coming up on roughly 2015-ish. You know, the very last game I did, one of the away players, I think it was from the Newport Gulls, and these were all collegiate level players. A lot of them are already in Major League Baseball as of right now. The same guys that I was talking to. And one guy came up to me in the last game, and on the other side of the fence, he just said, "Hey, I just want to let you know that I know this isn't the greatest ballpark in the league," because it really wasn't. It was just a side yard field at best. But he said, "You make these games so much fun to play in. Even as a visiting player, I love coming here, and I hear you hit, you know, the opening music. You're so passionate about announcing the rosters. You play the Death Star music when you're announcing the opening lineup for the opponents. You got the opening, just through the roof." And I just wanted to say thank you for making this so much fun.
That's awesome that someone came over and said something like that.
It really did. I never in a million years expected anything of the sort, especially with some of the sound effects I was playing against the opposition. I mean, we're talking, I would play Three Blind Mice if the umpires got together. It was like that, you know? So it was really interesting for that to happen. You had Chili Diamond Davis come out and do Sweet Caroline in his leather diamond-studded jacket. Got to make sure the wireless microphones are ready for that. And there were so many other things that were entitled into it. But long story short, one experience along the road, learning all that really prepared me for the next step of that career path, which would eventually be joining you to work at PSAV in multiple locations across Boston and New England. So I really got an in-depth look at that point on the proper uniform, getting the show blacks going. And I'll never forget the first time I showed up for my first shift. I was so proud in all my show blacks. It was so crazy. I think it was the Omni Parker House was my very first time. And I went to Fenway Park. We went to, the Seaport. We went to the BCEC. We went everywhere. And each experience was its own. Nothing was ever, of course, the gear is the same, but the execution is always different. The people were always the same, yet different. And learning how to be malleable enough to flow with that as it unfolded. And don't get me wrong, I had my share of mess ups along the way. The best one was probably showing up at midnight for the loadout, only to find that everything was already loaded out. And I said, "What's going on?" And they said, "Well, that was midnight last night, Ben. Remember? If the date is, 12/20, whatever it was, midnight, you needed to be here the night of the 19th.
That's pretty funny.
That's not what happened, but I helped clean up at that point, and we had a good laugh about it. They didn't fire me for no showing and no calling, because it was pretty funny the way it was just like, "Hey, where is everybody? Get my coffee." Like, I'm all set, ready to go. Like, what a jerk, right? But, after that, being able to participate in things like Fenway Park, again, we're very lucky here in Boston to have a legendary venue like that and be able to say that you worked behind the scenes and you helped bring an event to life there. That's something that's not just a resume builder. That is an experience in life that you just can't replicate in training any other way. So now, after all this comes to fruition, it finally comes the time where TD Garden comes a-calling. Along the way, of course, you get to do the play-by-play, and that's where I really started to expand in that. When the radio station got further involved after all this, because again, it kind of keep bouncing back and forth. As you build these bricks, you kind of have to keep stepping up as you move. And eventually I moved on from just doing sports scores to, there's an evening board operator position. So I did that. And that job taught me a lot about live events, live functioning of the board, audio levels, gain control, gain staging, placement. Microphone placement is key, folks. Don't let anybody lie to you that it isn't. I mean, matter of fact, there we go. Did that job for, God help me, almost 5 years. And then I got my own show, which was a very short-lived talk show. And the only reason it was short-lived is because the position at WMEX became available right after COVID, which I guess I'm kind of skipping a whole bunch here, folks.
That's all right.
I'll backtrack just a little bit. Leaving the vacuum business as a salesperson, because I'm a good people person, but a good vacuum salesman, I kind of sucked.
Yeah.
Pun intended.
It's okay.
So after that, I found an opportunity at another AV rental organization in Canton. And again, Mark, you were involved in that transition because, you know, when you have a need for people that you know have a certain skill set and you know they're available, it's a disservice if you don't call them. And you did. I was able to make that transition. And from there, I got a whole nother level of crash course in not only audio, but now video, projection, which was a huge thing. It still is to this day. And want to give a huge shout out to a good friend, Alexei Kazyanov. If not for his stubborn Eastern Ukrainian kindness, is the best way I can put it. Kindness, yes. Kindness with big smile. I love the guy dearly, and I owe him a lot because he taught me there's no room for excuses. There's no room for your explanations. Did you get it done?
Yeah.
And that was a big lesson to learn. On top of all the pushing and the pulling and the lifting of the cases and the learning of the QC process, and which is a whole nother beast upon learning the internal organs of so many different devices and mediums, and I mean, it was just never ending. And then COVID came. March 11th, 2020, I'll never forget the day. The warehouse was gathered to a meeting, and literally the general manager at the time came out and said, this is after 2 or 3 weeks of absolutely unknown. Nobody knew what was going on. We were all terrified. Matter of fact, I'll even share that the audio department that I was in at that time, we had a TV, we were watching the news because that's what everybody was doing, trying to figure out what in the world was going on. And we see, an outbreak of some virus at a event in Boston at the, I think it was just outside the aquarium or something like that.
It was at Marriott Long Wharf.
Yeah, it was Long Wharf, yeah, that's right. And I remember standing there looking at the TV that had a shot of a Shure microphone handheld case with the company tag on it. And we looked down at the desk that we were QCing on, only to realize it was the exact same case that we were seeing on TV that they had shot the day before.
It's scary.
And we looked down, we looked up, we looked down, we looked up, and then we looked at the general manager and said, what's going on? And the only corporate answer that you could get at the time was, everything's fine, everything's fine, everything's fine. Okay, I don't think so, but all right. So we moved on from that and flash forward now back to 3 weeks. Everybody, I'm so sorry, but due to the outbreak of whatever the heck is going on, all AV events scheduled have been canceled. Millions of dollars in business, because we were on an upward growth trend in the warehouse.
Yeah.
We were expected to triple our yearly output from the year before. And then all of a sudden, not only were the brakes slammed on, but all of the business was canceled, taken completely off the books. And that left the company no other choice but to let 90% of the staff go. And I was one of those unlucky few. And I remember going home that night and having to tell my family that I don't know what's happening, but I don't have a job in AV at the moment, and I don't really know what to do. I still had the radio station job, thank goodness. So I just continued on with that. WMEX ended up opening up shortly thereafter, so I was only out of the game full-time for maybe a month or so.
And it's important to note that Tony from Bissell is also the owner of WMEX, which is how those dots get connected, because I don't think we've...
Oh, we haven't even got to that.
I don't think we've touched on that yet, but that's what opened up the door. So you think, why is Ben talking about working for this vacuum company? Because it all kind of comes around to the WMEX position.
And let me go ahead and connect those dots for you. So obviously knowing the owner and him staying as a friend, even beyond working for him, when WMEX came about, the original owner that had put it on the air, we had operated for about a year. And then the boss said, listen, we're not making the revenue that we thought we were going to make. And unfortunately, I can't pay you guys to keep going. It was myself, it was Larry Justice, and 2 other DJs at the time. And he said, I'm gonna pull the plug on this project in about a month. So just to let you guys know. So of course the panic sets in. We're all like, well, we're just getting through telling people we're saving radio in Boston. It can't die like that quickly.
Yeah.
So the mutual connection between Tony and myself happened to be Larry Justice. And Larry actually didn't even know that I knew Tony. So he called Tony on his own and said, listen, I know you're a fan of the station, playing all the 50s, 60s, and 70s music that we all grew up with. How would you feel about purchasing the station and saving it from being turned off altogether? I gotta tell you folks, in the middle of COVID, in the most uncertain economy the American people have ever known, this guy, Tony LaGreca, said, I'll do it. I'm gonna spend the $3 million to acquire all assets to do with the station and save it. And I'm really only doing it because, Larry, I worked with you back in the day, back in the 80s, and he did, way back when. They sold a lot of vacuums together. But he also said the other reason I'm doing this securely and confidently is because I know Ben will do a good job and maintain the line for us. And to me, that was the biggest compliment I could have ever gotten in my life. And I think it still stands to this day, other than my fiance saying yes to marrying me, is the biggest compliment I've ever gotten. And here we are now, 5 years later, still standing, still pushing, still expanding, and just, it all worked out. But all of this was predicated on a gamble and a half, of which I don't think even I could have ever foreseen it going like this.
Yeah.
But long story short, to re-answer the question in a summarized way, it took a lifetime of wanting. It took all of the knowledge available to absorb and retain. And on my part, that was no easy task, folks. Just trust me on that one. But when you really have a passion for something and you can visualize that dream happening, which I did, and I had to force myself to do sometimes, because I'd be lying if I said every day was not the easiest day. There were days where I absolutely questioned what on earth I was doing. Is this the right thing to do for me? Is this the right thing to do for my family? Is this the right thing to do at all? Because obviously most people, when they think, oh, I need to go make money, I need to go get a career, they go into finance, they go into real estate, they go into something that's going to make them that salary pretty much without question. But Mark, why do anything the easy way when you can do it the excruciatingly hard way?
Right.
And that's the path of AV that I ended up taking. The hardest possible way going. But you know what? Without friends like you and mentors along the way that showed me it was possible, it was doable. You can execute on these plans if you have a plan. And that's really what it was, is sticking to it and just not giving up on not only yourself, but not giving up on the dream. And I might be in the middle of a nightmare myself, but that dream holds still. You know, I'm not saying that I actually am, but like I said, not every day is coated in sugar and roses.
Yeah, no one has a perfect day every day.
That's right. You know, but at the end of the day, I have to credit you a lot, because I don't really think that it would have gone as far as it has for me, even to this point, without a dedicated mentor and friend to be there to answer those questions. And when you finally start going out and doing shows on your own and having a problem, and just knowing that I can pick up the phone and call Mark and say, Mark, I screwed up. How do I fix this? And somehow Mark being able to fix it, even if he wasn't there, just by, Ben, did you make sure it's plugged in? Oh my God, why didn't I think of that? That happened at least twice, I'll be honest.
But it's all about if you're taking the risk to go out and try to do these events and trying to do these types of jobs, it's in my best interest to make sure that you know how to problem solve and how to teach you how to. You don't know what you don't know. I say that a lot on this channel. And if you get stuck, it's important to teach you the right way rather than just say, hold on, I'll do it. And then it's nurturing you to learn why these things work the way they work. But then also when you're mentoring somebody and that person's calling you and saying, Ben, I don't know what I'm doing. How do I do this? You have the tool set now to be able to show them what to do. So it's all about paying it forward. And that's the only thing that I can ask is, giving you all this information and insight and experience and seeing your passion. Just pay it forward for the next person when someone starts having the saucer eyes looking at you going, how do I do this? How do I get involved in this? I want to be on the radio, Ben. And then, then you'll take over that role.
And honestly, it's already kind of started a couple of times like that. I've been asked to do a couple of talks at Massasoit, and a couple of other schools have come through doing tours at the station, and you get to show even a tour group of 15 to 20 students. I remember we had one come in from Massasoit College, and they said, we just want to watch you do your thing for a moment and maybe answer a few questions if you don't mind. And to your point, Mark, they asked those questions. How did you get in here? How did you start? How do you do it?
What degree do you have?
Exactly. What degree do you must make millions of dollars doing this. And I said, no. That guy right there is my new boss, because he says I make $1 million. Sold. No givesies, no backsies. But to be able to share that, even though I still feel like a student myself sometimes, all the time, it's one of those things, like you said, Mark, to be able to pay that forward and give it back to the next generation. We're not going to be the ones to do this forever. We'll have a good 30, 40, maybe 50-year run, but eventually, just like the people that came before us, the show will end, and the next generation will have to pick that up and go. And just like any other sport, any other game, any other career, any other industry, if we, the ones present now, don't consider tomorrow, and the people that we might find annoying sometimes, maybe there's a few too many questions, maybe I call Mark one too many times, those are the moments that matter most, because that's what the future is going to be built upon. And I know that I'll probably be doing AV for a long time because of your mentorship, your friendship, and all the other people along the road that have helped. I feel like I keep their spirit going, whether they're with us or not. And I hate to say there are a few that are no longer with us. And I do what I do to honor that spirit every day. I could just as easily pretend like, oh, I'm the one, I did this, is all my talent. That would be the greatest disservice I could think.
Yeah, would be. Well, that's awesome, Ben. I think we're almost here at the job site, so I think we spent our time wisely.
I think so too. Time to lock in with these butterflies.
Yeah, man. Thank you so much for doing this and for jumping on and being my first interview on the channel. And look forward to having you on more.
I appreciate that, Mark, and thank you very much for the honor of being on your podcast with you. This is great. And folks, if you're not already following and subscribed to Mark's content, I don't know what you're waiting for, but click that button right now, especially if you are aspiring to get into this career, this path. I promise you, it'll be time well spent.
Thanks, Ben.
Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good one.
See ya.